Hi everybody, and welcome back to INTR 101, College Success Strategies. Today we're going to be talking about giving and receiving feedback. So I want to start with a quick question, and that is, why is feedback important in college? So take a minute, reflect on it, and kind of mull that over, and we'll dive right in. So the first question you may want to ask yourself is, why do instructors actually give feedback? Well, the main point is that it's there to help you improve on future assignments or on a draft that you've turned in right now. It's also there to clarify expectations on assignments. So if you're submitting a first draft, a lot of that feedback is there to help make sure that you understand the expectations on the final draft. And then it's also to help students master the material and build a firm understanding of the topic. So I like to think about this instance a lot in our art and architecture programs because a lot of times you're going to be getting feedback professionally later in your life in those careers, and getting it now is a really good opportunity to build your mastery of the content that you're covering. So what makes good feedback? Well, number one, it's educational. It can be used as a reference for future work. So you should be able to go back and look at old essays or old assignments, see that feedback and incorporate it into future assignments. Number one, it's constructive, or I guess number two, it's constructive. It should never tear you down. It should provide feedback in order for you to build up anything that you're working on. And finally, it should provide a clear path for making improvements. So we want the feedback itself to be clear, and we want the path to improvement to also be clear. So how does receiving feedback make you feel? Personally, it's rough, right? The first time I ever received like a really honest critique on some of my work, and it was an essay that I can still remember, it felt like it was a personal attack. It felt like I had failed somehow and that like everything I did was wrong. So I understand that getting that feedback, especially if it's the first time that you're receiving feedback, can feel really personal. So some things to keep in mind is, number one, it isn't personal. This feedback shouldn't be or shouldn't feel like or shouldn't be intended as an attack on you as a person. It can be really, really hard to hear that feedback, but it isn't a reflection of your personal worth. So it also doesn't mean that you're bad at a course or a skill. It's just there's some areas that you can improve, and this is how you can do it. And this provides an opportunity for you to improve your skills. So kind of keep that in mind. I understand our tendency to want to say, like, if any one thing is wrong in an assignment, that the whole thing must be bad, but that just isn't the case. Feedback is there to point out what needs some improvement, but it doesn't mean that the entire thing is awful. So what do we do when we're given feedback? How do we handle it? How do we incorporate that feedback in order to improve our material? So number one, I always encourage folks to tackle the easy problems first. So those are things like spelling, grammar, syntax, math errors, incorrect definitions, all of the little things that are really, really easy. It should only take a couple seconds per problem to fix. And that does a couple of things. One, usually the bulk of the feedback are those tiny little errors. So getting rid of all of them first helps clarify things for yourself, make everything look a lot nicer. Now, if you get some feedback about clarity, like your argument isn't clear, the way that you're writing this paragraph isn't necessarily clear to me, take a second and try reading your work out loud to hear what it might sound like to others. So oftentimes when we're typing, it's all internal dialogue and it's everything that we're like saying to ourselves in our brain. And it probably makes a ton of sense in that way because we know what we're talking about. So we have to kind of sanity check ourselves and read it out loud and hear it again in that format. Because oftentimes when we do that, we can figure out like, oh yeah, that wording is confusing. It isn't really clear where I'm going with this. So after doing that out loud reading, it's usually pretty easy to fix some of those clarity concerns. Next, let's say you got some feedback about needing to, support your claims a little bit better. return to your notes and sources to find the details that you could include to either back up the things that you're claiming or to provide some clarity for people who are reading it. Next, look for additional help, whether that's from tutors, friends, or other instructors. Maybe it's really unclear how else you can support that argument, so reaching out to other folks to kind of get their feedback, or just having a friend read your paper to say like, oh yeah, this isn't really making sense here. Maybe if you worded it like this, it would be a little more clear. And then after you make changes, check back in to get more feedback. So oftentimes we kind of make the feedback discussion really one-sided, where it's like, you submit your assignment, I give you feedback, and that's the end of the day. But it's much more of a conversational process that needs a couple rounds back and forth. So you give me your assignment, I give you feedback and give it back, you make some changes, and then send it back. Let me look at it again. Let's see if those concerns about clarity or, syntax or anything like that were all corrected. After I read it a second time, there might be something else that's kind of more nuanced that sticks out that I can send back to you. And we can just continue to make your assignment more and more amazing. So, after you make those changes, make sure to get additional feedback. So, all right, I'm telling you to go get additional feedback, but how do you actually ask for feedback, right? So some instructors don't provide feedback for all assignments. So how do you find it? Well, number one, check that the feedback isn't hidden in BB Learn. So I learned this the hard way as an instructor, but occasionally if you enter the feedback after every essay prompt in one certain box, students then have to click through a lot of things to find that feedback. So double check by kind of clicking through each individual, essay prompt, if that's where you're at on BB Learn, to see if that feedback is kind of hidden in there. Next, if you can't find it there, send an email or drop by office hours to connect with the professor. And when you're doing that, make sure to be specific. So rather than going into the appointment and being like, what's wrong with my paper, try and figure out hey, you took off points on the grading rubric in this area. Can you explain how I missed something or where it went wrong? If you lost points on a specific essay question, take that one question in and figure out if you can find out where things went wrong. And then number one with all of this requesting feedback or seeking out feedback is don't wait till the end of the semester. So it's really hard to implement changes if you don't have any more assignments. So, try and be really proactive with that feedback seeking. If after your first essay, you notice that you missed out on a lot of points in one certain area, go in and have that conversation right from the start. And that's going to do a couple things. One, it's going to show your professor that you're really serious about their course and that you're invested in it. And two, it's going to help you out way more in the long run. So if you can figure out where you're kind of missing out on some points early, you can implement those changes for all future assignments and just correct the problem right away. Some other things about asking for feedback. If you need feedback on more than just your past assignments, check out the Writing Center to get feedback on your writing during the process. So your instructor isn't the only person you can go to. Like I said, the Writing Center is one. Next, you can also meet with a tutor to get feedback on assignments before you turn them in. So let's say you're in a art and architecture class, right? Go and see if there's a TA or a tutor in that discipline who could give you some initial feedback before you submit the thing. Connect with career services to get feedback on materials for jobs, but also for things like resumes that you might be submitting for a class, right? So again, it's a totally free service. They have a lot of availability. They'd be more than happy to go over your materials for a job application or for some class that relates to kind of career exploration. So seeking out feedback is a really great skill to learn in college because it's gonna come up all through life. Oftentimes in my job, I have to reach out to my supervisor or to other campus partners in order to get feedback about the material that I include in my class or in my presentations, or because of some student concern that popped up during a one-on-one appointment. So I've had to get really good about asking for it. And I feel like I really got to practice that skill in undergraduate and graduate school, and it's come in handy a lot in life. So keep that in mind. This is also exceptionally true for jobs that have a really strong design element for them. So whether that's architecture or engineering or something to do with music, any kind of project that has a lot of like creativity elements to it is going to incorporate a lot of feedback. So practicing that skill now makes it a lot easier when you get into the job. So we've talked about how we get feedback, how it makes us feel, and how we seek it out. But how do we provide feedback? So some classes require you to give feedback to your peers on assignments. And when you're giving that feedback, you want to keep a couple of things in mind. You want to ensure that your feedback is really constructive. So you don't want to be petty or mean to a classmate just because maybe you aren't a fan of the topic that they picked, right? You want to set that aside and focus on the assignment at hand and make sure that everything you give is constructive. To do that, you want to provide some clear tips on how your peers can improve their work. So, try and see if there's a clear path to improving something. Don't just tell them that like your assignment's unclear. Point out where that's unclear or how they can improve that. And make sure to be mindful of your language. So think of how you'd like to hear feedback, right? You probably wouldn't want someone to tell you that your essay isn't good, right? Like that hurts and it's not constructive. So thinking about, okay, what exactly about this essay isn't great, and then focusing on those things. And finally, concentrate on things that can be fixed. So things like grammar, syntax, word choice, math errors, those are all really concrete things that a student can look at, fix, and move right along. There are also things like lack of evidence, confusing language, unclear work/methods. All of those things can also be improved and can be fixed, so long as when you're pointing them out, you provide clear context and a path to move forward with them. So if you're pointing out that someone's argument has a lack of evidence, you wouldn't say something like, this isn't valid. You would say something like, currently, your argument doesn't have enough supporting resources, data points, evidence to really get the reader on board. Try incorporating more outside sources to make it more clear what your argument is. Same goes for confusing language or unclear work. Try pointing out exactly what's confusing about it or where you're lost in their work. So here's some example language that you could try using if you're giving some peer feedback. So things like, there is some confusion about what you're saying. Consider changing your wording to make your argument clearer. It looks like there were some spelling and grammar errors. I've highlighted/circled them to help you fix those. Great work. I really enjoyed how detailed your story was. This is an important thing. So if the piece of work that you're reading is genuinely really great and hits all of the criteria needed for the assignment, it's also important to give positive feedback. Tell someone something good about their assignment, right? And if there are some errors, try and find a point within the assignment that really stuck out as amazing for you and highlight that for the student. So another example, overall, the paper was well written. Adding a bit more detail to your method section could really take it to the next level. Can you explain the process you used in more detail? So that's another great thing about feedback, is giving someone a clear question to expand upon. So let's say overall the assignment was good, but it wasn't really like a showstopper. Giving someone a question or a prompt can allow them to expand on it and really fill out and improve their assignment, their essay, their paper, whatever it is that they're working on. So why is developing this skill useful? Well, we've talked about it a little bit, but we give and receive feedback every single day, whether that's super formally, where we're like peer-to-peer feedback, or informally. Let's say a friend is just asking for some advice, or a coworker is asking for you to look over something kind of casually. So learning how to use the feedback we're given and then give good feedback in return to others will really help us in all of these different aspects in life. So, if you want to be more supportive to your friends when they come to you for advice, learning how to give clear feedback that they can take and improve upon or utilize in their life is one way to do that. So there's a link to a video here, and I have it on BB Learn, that you can click through, and it's a really great little TED Talk about how to give really, really good feedback and what makes that feedback really useful. So that is all that I have for you today. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I will talk to you all soon. Bye-bye.